Tennessee football went to Columbia, Missouri, and got unmasked for the average team that it is. The most embarrassing loss, quite frankly, of the Josh Heupel era. Welcome into the Volunteer State. I'm Blake Toppmeyer, alongside the Knoxville News Sentinel's Adam Sparks and John Adams. We will unpack the ugly scene that was at Missouri on Saturday in a look ahead to this weekend's game against undefeated two-time national champion Georgia, a game that coming into the season I feel like was circled on a lot of Vols fans' calendars, and now Tennessee fans probably just want to get this over with to some degree. So, guys, we'll get to Georgia in a little bit, but we need to start with where the season really got sideways for Tennessee, I feel like, because here it was a week ago. We're talking about, well, could Tennessee get to the Citrus Bowl? Will fans be excited by a Citrus Bowl? You can take the Citrus Bowl off the table, I think, at this point. And I don't know where Tennessee is going to go, but they're staring down the barrel of what, to me, I think could be described as a pretty mediocre season. More on that in a minute. But, Adam, what did you see in Columbia Saturday?
Well, I mean, I will say that at today's press conference, Josh Heupel sensed what the mood would be towards Georgia going from the Missouri game to the Georgia game, because he led off talking about Dolly Parton, that Dolly is going to be at the game. Welcome, Dolly. And then he went right into injuries and mentioned that Dante Thornton, the wide receiver, is out for the season, just so people don't understand. Josh Heupel does not usually make those type of announcements. So he was doing anything he could was to deflect attention away from what happened in Columbia, Missouri, which is probably a good tactic for what happened there. I mean, I had a buddy of mine text me during the game that said that asked me, is the honeymoon over for Josh Heupel? And I think that's kind of a good way of putting it, because I think up till this point, 2.5 years into Josh Heupel's tenure, he has always gotten the benefit of the doubt. So, if the offense wasn't playing well, fans and even sometimes media would say, yeah, but Josh Heupel will figure this out. It's not on him. It's on somebody. It's his personnel or something else. It's not on him. If they lost in a controversial fashion, it was the officials. It had to be the officials. Tennessee wouldn't commit this many penalties. It had to be the officials. It was a bad matchup. It was a bad scene. It was a bad something. But it was rarely laid at Josh Heupel's feet. Even when it was the defense was the biggest issue through a couple of the first years, it was more about, it wasn't on Josh Heupel. It was, hey, that defense should play like Josh Heupel's offense should, forgetting the fact that Josh Heupel's the head coach of the whole program. I think this game turned things where people are now holding Josh Heupel accountable. And the benefit of the doubt, I think, is gone. Now, he's still a really good coach. He was the SEC Coach of the Year last year. He's a phenomenal offensive mind. But I think people are now skeptical of his decisions now. Anytime something bad happens to Tennessee or something happens in a game that's Tennessee's fault, it's not going to be some player or other coach on the team. It's going to be, why is Josh Heupel letting that happen, and why has he not fixed it? And I think that turned. And it turned really because we now see the difference in an exception and a rule with especially this football team. The Florida game early in the year, when Tennessee was bad on the road, they fell apart. They just absolutely fell apart and lost that game. We looked at that as saying that's probably the exception. They're probably going to get this fixed. Now that we've seen it at Missouri, and we saw it last year's team at South Carolina, it seems more like the rule that Josh Heupel teams can fall apart on the road in a game that they should win or be very competitive in. And people will now be looking for that rule rather than thinking it's an exception. And I think that's where things turned in this program and for Josh Heupel's tenure the other night.
I agree with you, Adam. And I think it wasn't just that Tennessee lost the game. It was the way they lost in such a demonstrative fashion. And it's better for Tennessee to lose a high-scoring game, because then you can still believe very much in Josh Heupel. This guy's an offensive guru, just doesn't have enough defensive personnel right now to win these kind of games. And I think last year, I mean, going into this year, I thought, okay, if you hold somebody to 36 points, hold them to 36. You think with Tennessee's offense, it still could win the game. And that was the case last season. And I think I was so high on Tennessee's offense and Josh Heupel's system, I believe it could pretty much plug in anybody there at quarterback, and the system would keep cranking out touchdowns and big yardage. That hasn't been the case. And this loss isn't on Tennessee quarterback Joe Milton. Some other losses that have been kind of attributed to he was a bigger factor in, but I still think with this offense, it just doesn't fit Joe Milton's skill set. So it's always as though the offense is working around what Milton can and can't do. And it's not just the talent, the disparity in talent between Hendon Hooker last year, Joe Milton this year. It's what they can do well. And I still think Milton's better suited for another system. But the other aspect of it was, even while the offense wasn't what it was last season, I think fans were somewhat encouraged. Didn't know about the defense. Very skeptical. The fans were understandably of the defense coming into the season. But the way Tennessee's defense played early on was kind of changing the narratives. That big pass rush and really gaudy stats. But now I look at that defense and I look at the stats and I think, well, that said a lot about Tennessee's competition. Tennessee hasn't played that many really good teams. It's played Alabama. It's played Missouri. I mean, Florida's not a good team, but it's lost to its only two nationally ranked teams it's played by double-figure margins. And I think so now I think fans, the skepticism that was kind of drifting away is returning now about the defense.
Yeah, and I think, John, that's a good point about mentioning the offense and how good they were in the past, because the record is going to end up this year, let's say it's 8-4. It's going to end up pretty similar to the 2021 season when Tennessee went 7-5. But the feeling was different in that one, because you would see something that Tennessee would do even in a loss and say, well, once they get, just a little bit more to add to that, it's all going to work out. You think about the games in that first year where they lost a high-scoring game to Pitt. They lost a high-scoring game to Ole Miss. And you said, well, but they're close. It's okay because they're losing, because they're teasing us of what's to come. And then you look at that same season, and they hung 62 on Missouri. They hung 40-something on South Carolina. And so people believe that the upward trajectory, that the good things and losses were leading to something bigger. It's different in this one because I think the hope more is gone out of this team from the fan perspective. Now, could they go and play well against Georgia and restore some of that? Sure. Could they go and win a bowl game? Could they blow out Vandy? Sure. But I think people now look at this team and say, this team was never as good as I thought or I hoped it would be. And with 2 games left in the regular season, that's not what you want to think of your football team. Because I wrote it the other night after the game that we see the season now in a new light, because that Florida game wasn't a weird game. That's who this team. That's closer to who this team is than the opposite. The A&M game where Joe Milton threw for 100 yards and they won, but it was ugly and it was boring and it was dull. That's more what this team is than the exception.
Yeah, and the difference was Missouri's offense is a lot better than what Texas A&M's offense did. And you're right, Adam. For weeks, I was asking myself, how did Tennessee, even though it is the swamp, how did Tennessee go to Florida and lose to this Florida team in the manner that they did? And now it's like, oh, that's how they did it, because Tennessee's not very good. I mean, that was the real theme of Saturday, I thought, was Missouri's actually a good team. Tennessee's not. They're average. They're in that ranks of Kentucky more. And go ahead, Adam.
Sorry, Blake. And I have to wonder with Josh Heupel how much he's known that behind the scenes. He does not give us. He gives us almost nothing at press conferences. And you know when those coaches are sitting around and looking at game film and figuring out the scheme, if after the Florida game they said, "Oh, guys, we've got to hide this." You mentioned at the beginning of the pod they were unmasked. I wonder how long Josh Heupel has known what's really behind that mask, and thinking, "I've got to sort of piece this together. I've got to hide what our deficiencies are. I just got to figure out how to piece together some wins." I suspect he's known longer than certainly than the rest of us. I think he was very, very surprised by that 36-7 score the other night. But I don't know that he was absolutely shocked that they lost that game.
My question, guys, as we kind of look at this through the lens of a theme is, Tennessee's probably approaching an 8-4 season going into the bowl. You mentioned that earlier, Adam. They got Georgia this week. It would come as something of a shock. I think if Tennessee were to beat Georgia and then they finish with Vanderbilt, it would be even more shocking if Tennessee lost to Vanderbilt. So, like, on the one hand, you say 8-4. Okay, that's not the goal at Tennessee, but that's not bad. But as you unpack it further, it's a pretty fragile 8-4. I mean, let's look at it this way. The way I see it, Tennessee started the season 5-0. Their non-conference schedule is a joke. It was so weak that it would make Vanderbilt and Kentucky blush. I mean, Vanderbilt and Kentucky played tougher non-conference schedules than what Missouri played than what Tennessee played this year. And then you add in Vanderbilt, you're 5-0 at the start of the season. And so it's what do you do in your other 7 games? Right now, Tennessee is 3-3 with one remaining against Georgia, and like the crowning achievements for Tennessee this year is beating Texas A&M at home. Now, coming into the year, that looked like a really big game. Texas A&M 6-4 and just fired its coach, Jimbo Fisher. And your other crowning achievement is winning at Kentucky, which was an important win to keep this season from going down an even worse path. But I'm on the verge of calling this season a bust, and maybe that's a overreaction to losing to Missouri in the way they did, or what have you. But I look at the achievements here, and I think it's really pretty thin on what's been accomplished this year.
Yeah, I know the point of this episode is to sort of have a binary. Was it a hit or a miss, a make or a bust? It's hard for me to go one way or the other on those because I think this is a so-so season. If I had to go one or the other, I would go more towards bust because I think this 8-4 is going to look like a Kentucky 8-4, and you alluded to that a little bit, right? You beat bad teams and you lose to good teams, and that's what Kentucky has done for years. And good for Mark Stoops that he can get to 8 wins like that. But that's what this is looking like. I mean, even think back to the non-conference. Austin Peay scored first, and Tennessee won that one by 2 scores over Austin Peay. UTSA was supposed to be a game where Nico was going to play like the whole second half, but then UTSA came out and scored back-to-back touchdowns, and it's suddenly a competitive game. So even the bad teams, they weren't necessarily, just blowing them off the field. This is a so-so season. It's going to be. I know this sounds a little bit like a cop-out, but I think the best thing that Tennessee can do to make this season look better is go and win their bowl game. Now, a lot of fans don't care about bowl games. Media sometimes don't care about bowl games. It depends on who it is, where it is. Like I saw if the season ended today, they'd probably still eke into the Gator Bowl because there's not really going to be like 8-4 teams for them to compete against. There's some other scenarios we can get into later at another episode, but I saw a projection today that had them 8-4 playing Drake May in North Carolina in the Gator Bowl. Okay, you go and beat North Carolina if Drake May were to play. That would be fine. But otherwise, it's going to be hard to sort of put lipstick on the season because there was never. I think a lot of times fans and even media cling on to moments where they say, "Hey, I remember that season by this thing, by this game, by this play, by this performance." I don't know what that is. Their best win was Kentucky, and they ended up being an okay win. There wasn't some game where somebody, rushed for 200 yards, or Joe Milton never threw for 400. There wasn't a game where they put up 60 on a decent team. There's just not that moment. So I think we're going to go away from the season and just say, oh, okay, on to the next one. The difference between Josh Heupel's first season and this one, another difference is the first season you said, okay, this is going to lead into something next year. It's all building. The momentum is going. I think you're probably going to finish this year. If it's 8-4, you're going to say, I don't know that you're building to anything. You're just going to sort of cut this season off and start over. I don't think a lot of the good things from this season will carry over to the next. And that's disappointing because I think there was an opportunity this year to really get the ball rolling.
Yeah, I think when you look at this season, at this stage of the year, fans are looking to next year. They will be shouting, maybe even in the Georgia game, if things aren't going well, we want Nico Yama Alava. No, I missed it. Never mind. I should have just said Nico.
It was a good attempt, John.
No, I left out the Leva. What to me is we had an upward trajectory going, and Tennessee had an upward trajectory going, and now the trajectory is going the other way because of this season. But to me, it's about the offense, because that's what Josh Heupel is about. That's what he was about before he came here. That's what he was about his first year. That's certainly what he was about last year when Tennessee led the country in points and yards per game. So I think there was a comfort amongst the fan base that no matter what happened, Tennessee's offense would be really good. Now, it might not win every game. It might not qualify the playoff or win the East or anything of that nature, but that it would go down scoring. I mean, it would have lost to Missouri maybe 38-34 or something. But the way the offense has looked, the stats have fallen off dramatically, but it's more than stats. We go back and we look at last year, and the scores came it was like an avalanche of points. They just came so quickly again and again and again, all these big plays. We haven't seen that. This looks like a different coach is in charge of the program. And I know it has to do with the personnel, and in some ways he's adjusted pretty well. He did that at Central Florida one year when they were mainly a run-oriented team. But the belief that no matter what, Tennessee can stay competitive because it's got one of the best offensive coaches in the country, I don't know if that's a consensus opinion of fans as this season comes to a close.
Yeah, I want to circle back to a couple things Adam said. I thought they were good points. Adam, you described this as like a Kentucky 8-4 season. I thought that was a really good comparison because Kentucky can kind of schedule a couple of MAC teams, maybe in a year where they beat Louisville, get one against Vanderbilt and South Carolina, and they look up at the end of the year and they're 8-4. But Tennessee fans look at that and say, yeah, but what did they really accomplish? And I think this Tennessee season falls into that category. But you also said, Adam, that the bowl game could kind of define how we think about this season to a certain degree. And I would agree with that because no, bowl games don't mean what they used to. And a trip to the Gator Bowl on the heels of last year's Orange Bowl is not going to excite Big Orange country. However, if they were to get like a North Carolina matchup that you mentioned earlier, and you beat North Carolina, that's something to hang your hat on. And then you say, we went 9-4, wasn't the season they wanted, but finished with a bowl win and beat North Carolina. Now I've seen another projection that has them against Georgia Tech in the Gator Bowl. That would not be a real chance for a signature moment. But I think what I'm hearing there is, Adam, is as I'm trying to determine whether the season is a bust or not, maybe let's just wait and see what happens the last couple of weeks. They can keep it from going down that path, and a win in a bowl game to get to 9-4 reshapes the perception a little bit, even though at the end of the day, there's still a ceiling on how excited anyone should be about. Even at 9-4, it's not a great achievement, but it does change the overall perception based on what happens the next few weeks.
Yeah, and for fans listening to this saying, guys, it's 2 games left. Why do y'all feel like you're doing sort of a season wrap up? It's because the schedule, how it works out. There's not toss up games left. There's a game where, everybody in this hemisphere feels like Tennessee's going to lose to Georgia. That now they haven't lost to Neyland in a long time, so let's wait and see. But they're a heavy underdog to Georgia. They'll be a heavy favorite over Vanderbilt. So there's not that, game like they just had against Missouri where it's a ranked team and, if you win, it's a signature win for the season. That's just not on the schedule. And I also want to go back to what I said before about sort of what this season is, so and all that. I think there are good players and there are good elements to this team. I think they're just so thin. It's so shallow what the good parts are. I've had so many questions about what's wrong with this team over the past couple of days. And I know you guys have had the same. Is there no leadership on this team? Yeah, okay. Cooper Mays is a leader. He was injured on the offensive line. Keenan Peely was brought in to be a leader in the linebacking core and had filled that. He got injured in the first game. He was done. Brew McCoy was for sure the alpha leader in the wide receiver room. A few games into the season, he's out for an injury. So there are bad circumstances there. But once you take off sort of that veneer of leadership that they have, there's not much under it. They have some really good players. But you scrape off Jalen Wright and you scrape off Tyler Barron and James Pierce and a few others, you're left with, middle of the pack SEC players. And so we're seeing that now late in the year. I mean, Brew McCoy was injured. He's out. And so the receiving core struggles. And then Dante Thornton, their transfer, he's now done for the regular season with an injury. And suddenly this explosive offense, it's supposed to put up 500 yards a game, is down to Ramel Keaton, who's had an okay year, Squirrel White, who will be blanketed by everybody in coverage, everybody that Georgia has, and two redshirt freshmen, Chaz Nimrod and Caleb Webb. And who knows, Nathan Leacock, the true freshman, may get in there. So you're just, once you scraped away your hopes in terms of personnel and leadership and what this team is good at, there just wasn't that much below. And the later that you get into the season, those kinds of things are exposed, and that's certainly what happened at Missouri.
If you want to take the glasses half full approach, you could look at this season and say, let's say the regular season plays out the way you depict it, Adam, and Tennessee finishes 8-4, wins a bowl game, it's 9-4. That would be not just the pinnacle of the Butch Jones era. He had two 9-win seasons. It would be the pinnacle of Tennessee football from 2008 through 2020. That's 13 years. So if you look at it from that perspective, and I don't think many people will, after an 11-2 season in 2022, but at least you can maybe find some encouragement at that the bad times aren't as bad as they used to be, that Tennessee, okay, the best win was over Kentucky. There were some other seasons where Tennessee couldn't beat Kentucky, a few seasons, and there were some seasons where it even lost to Vanderbilt. So it's not as though the program is in free fall, but it's not what fans had hoped for. So,
yeah, John, and I've said this for the past few weeks now. It's a lot of this season will be viewed long term about whether or not it will depend on whether or not this was closer to the floor or closer to the ceiling of Josh Heupel's tenure. They were 7-5 year one, then they were 11 or 7-6, and they were 11-2. Now they're going to be 8-4 or 9-4 or something like that. Well, have we hit the ceiling and now we're kind of going back towards the floor, or is this the floor from this point? And next year it's back up to 10 wins or 11 wins or whatever. Because if this year they're 8-4 in the regular season, and then you kind of get back to playing better next year, this year you look at it and say, well, it's fine. They took a little dip. It was fine because they got right back on it. There's going to be ebbs and flows. But if next year you have the same issues and you're not beating top 25 teams and you have issues on the road, then you'll see the last season as an anomaly, and then this is just sort of a 7 or 8 win type of program, and they've got to protect against that. And I mean, I'm curious to see what's going to happen the next 2 weeks. But once we get into December, and we're talking transfer portal, and we're trying to figure out where they go for next season, it's free agency is coming, and they got to figure out how to make this team back into a 10-win team and to hold off these 6, 7, 8-win type seasons.
So I want to finish with a thought on the Georgia game. But first, what a great point, John, that if Tennessee can get to 9-4, that will match the peak moments of the Butch era. I mean, that is good perspective, and I don't think anyone would accuse us of being an apologist podcast here. We don't take that stance, but that is good perspective. That's a good way of putting it, which I think all the more points says, like, hey, nothing to play for. These last few weeks, there is something to play for. They're getting 9 wins would salvage something out of this. And now looking at Georgia, and that's the reason why we say we're not saying 10 wins is still on the board, because we're all thinking what probably you're all thinking listening to this is that it would take a monumental task for Tennessee to beat Georgia on Saturday. So while Adam and John were covering Tennessee, Missouri Saturday, I was watching from the press box in Athens before covering Georgia's destruction of Lane Kiffin's Rebels. And Georgia just, it looks like a team that gets better every week. Their offensive line just absolutely dominated Ole Miss. Carson Beck is playing at a level that I would not be surprised for him to get in the Heisman conversation. He's not going to win. Wouldn't totally surprise me for him to finish in the top 5. I think he's got that type of year going for him. The running backs are they got weapons all over the field on offense. And then defense, they're maybe not as good as the last 2 years' defenses. But, I mean, what does that say? If you're close to being like the defense was the last couple of years, that's still pretty darn good. So having said all that I don't see really very many chinks in the Georgia armor here, if any. Can you guys give me any sort of path to the unthinkable happening at Neyland Stadium? I mean, the odds makers say it's just a 10-point spread. So somebody out there maybe thinks there's a thought.
It's for Tennessee to play winning football this week or somewhere in that neighborhood. The word is survival. It's survival mode. Maybe even pride. But if they put any kind of product on the field like they had at Missouri, they're going to get beat by whatever score Kirby Smart chooses, 50, 60, whatever. And that would be embarrassing, obviously, in Neyland Stadium. Tennessee has not lost in Neyland in like 2 years, 14-game winning streak at Neyland. There's an immense pride that nobody comes into Neyland and beats the Vols. And certainly nobody comes into Neyland and blows out the Vols. And, this team knows how good Georgia is, and they know that Georgia's better than Missouri. And so I think in some aspect, it's a positive that they're playing this elite type of team this week, because they're going to go in and think you've got to survive first, try to make it a game, and then you can think about winning the game in the second half. I think if you had just a middle of the pack team coming in, I don't know if it'd be guaranteed that you could get Tennessee up for this game, but they're not going to get embarrassed in Neyland, or they're going to do everything to prevent that. So I think you'll probably get a good Tennessee performance. I don't know if that'll be enough to upset Georgia, but I don't think they'll go down lightly just because they know they're defending that home field, and they don't want to let that streak go away with somebody marching over them like Missouri did in Columbia the other night.
Fear of failure can be a powerful motivator. Fear of embarrassment can be an even more powerful motivator. And I think that's what Tennessee has to be thinking a little bit. How could you not? When you look at what Georgia has done against some pretty good teams, Ole Miss was ranked 9th in the country. It only lost 1 game, lost by 14 to Alabama, beat LSU. And as Blake said, total annihilation. Then go back to Kentucky when Kentucky in that favorable early season schedule had left at 5-0. You don't want to play Georgia when you're 5-0, because then you've got Georgia's attention, and then it's going to be a dismantling. What has impressed me so much about Georgia is that it always rises to the occasion. And I think even if Tennessee played the best game possible, if Neyland Stadium were at its loudest, and Georgia was pushed to the brink of losing its massive winning streak, I still think Georgia could pull out a win. I just think it's become that kind of program, which is a testament to what Kirby Smart has done. And I think Tennessee, I agree with Adam. I think Tennessee will play well. But if Georgia's at the top of its game, it still could lose by 20 points.
All right, well that's a wrap on this one. It's a 3:30 kickoff at Neyland on Saturday. You find all the coverage at knoxnews.com, and we will be back with you next week. Thanks for listening to the Volunteer State.